Hey everyone, welcome back to the Holy Roast Podcast. We are in season 3, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. We have interviewed all different sorts of people from within the Kentucky Annual Conference and all around the globe, and it has been just a great adventure to journey with you. We do encourage you to continue to like and to share and to comment, and we have an excellent lineup of guests for this season. And so I am so excited to pull up a chair and to journey with you through this next season of Holy Roast. So I'm Rob, and Rachel will be with me as we interview our next guest. Our next guest is Dr. Amy Jill Levine. She'll go by AJ throughout this episode. How awkward it is for me to call somebody who I look up to tremendously by their first name. But we will interview AJ and talk all about the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, about all the many ways in which we can be better preachers and better researchers when it comes to preparing our sermon. And I know you are going to love it. And so without further ado, here's our next episode. Well, hey, Holy Roast listeners, this is Rob and
Rachel.
And we are so glad that you are tuning in for season 3 of Holy Roast. Can you imagine we are on season 3?
Here we are.
Like, we haven't been canceled yet.
We haven't.
That we're aware of.
Nope.
The letter could still be in the mail, but we're still trucking and making it. And it's been a fantastic last couple of years with you journeying through the Holy Roast podcast. We hope that it has been helpful for you and for your ministry. We hope that has been encouraging and educational to a sense, but also just knowing that we're all in this journey together. And so season 3, we are in it, and this is our second episode here. And we have such a special guest with us, someone that even Rachel and I were saying before we met her in person that we're a little nervous about because she is incredible. An incredible author and speaker and religious leader. And I'm going to read off a little bit of who she is, but you probably are already very familiar with Dr. Amy Jill Levine. So she is the Rabbi Stanley M. Kessler Distinguished Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, and the University Professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies Emerita, Mary Jane Worthen Professor of Jewish Studies Emerita, Professor of New Testament Studies Emerita at Vanderbilt University. And so, but you may know her as one that wrote your local church curriculum in many sense. They have it. She has it at Watkins. I'll tell you that. And all the other churches I've had the privilege of serving in my ministry. But we are so glad and so fortunate to have you with us, AJ.
Yes, welcome.
I'm happy to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have some questions, and we're going to journey along. And like we have said for the last couple of seasons here at Holy Roast, we hope that you can just imagine sitting at a table with us and having a good cup of coffee or tea or whatever that would be for you, and are able to learn and to be part of education, but be inspired and motivated for the season of ministry that we are in right now. And so one of my favorite descriptors of you, AJ, is that I think you have self-described, and I have seen this posted all over the place, that you are a Yankee Jewish feminist who teaches New Testament. And I think that is just an excellent title. And I probably should have just read that one instead of the long one before. But can you unpack that a little bit for our listeners, and perhaps even how that unique identity helps you and shapes your reading of the New Testament?
Sure. Thanks for that gracious introduction. Apologies for the little scratch in my throat. I'm from Massachusetts. I have lived in Tennessee, which I gather is near Kentucky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that Americans are not supposed to be good at geography. I have lived here for close to 30 years.
Wow.
I did my graduate work at Duke, so 7 years in Durham.
Mm-hmm.
So
go Duke, go Blue Devils. Can we say that? That's good.
Maybe.
I think we ought to own where we're from and what our own cultural contexts are, so that whenever we do any sort of biblical studies, we don't erase who we are and try to, for some sort of objectivist reading, we figure out how we have a conversation with the text.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a neighborhood that was almost entirely Roman Catholic. The first person who registered to me as a Protestant, I met when I went to college. I wasn't quite sure what Methodists were until I got to Duke. Then I learned that the expression United Methodist was an oxymoron. But I did learn a lot about John Wesley. So I'm interested in avoiding the anti-Jewish teaching and preaching that frequently comes along with New Testament studies, because I got that when I was a kid, when kids on the school bus said to me, "You killed our Lord," and it's not helpful. I got it in college and in university graduate school where I was reading sources about how awful Judaism was. And then Paul and Jesus come with this like radical new agenda that gets rid of all the bad Jew stuff. I thought, no, surely we can do better. We can understand Paul and Jesus and much of the New Testament as products of Judaism, not products over and against Judaism. We can hear them better if we listen to them in their Jewish context. And as a biblical historian, I don't think we need to make Jesus or Judaism look bad in order for Paul and Jesus to look good. And in fact, if we do engage in that, making Judaism look bad in order to make them look good, that's not only bad history, it's also bad theology. So that's why I do what I do. And I like doing what I do because it's a way of preventing bigotry and it's a way of recovering Jewish history.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder how we recover that even today, right? In the ways that we have relationships with those who are some aspect of our identity different than us, right? And so able that we're in engagement, we're going to have some conversations about that towards the end. But I think just what you bring up already is who we also bring to the text and who we bring to conversational partners across the table. And I think it's just so important for us. I think that key part for us in the Board of Ordained Ministry is some self-awareness, you know, of who we are, how we've been formed, the aspects that we want to carry forward, some aspects that we need to repent of and move forward with, whatever tradition we come from. And it's just so fortunate because when I read your materials and when I have taught it and when I've preached it and used it as resources, it carries that identity with it. And it helps me as I read it and wrestle with it with my own identity that I bring to the text to be more faithful in the conversation that I have with it. And so I super appreciate what you bring to that and how intentional it seems that you are when you come to reading and proclaiming and writing for that text. So the next one is, you know, we regularly preach from the Gospels as Christian pastors, right? I mean, it seems like, and I've tried to be better in my own pastoral ministry to say, don't just preach the Gospels, but sometimes it just feels comfortable for us and more familiar with us. I don't know. But I wonder for us, if you can help share with our listeners a common misperception that Christians have about Jesus's Jewish context and wish that we would have more understanding about and what we could address more fully with our congregation. So what are some common misconceptions that you think we have?
Oh, sure. The view that first century Jewish women were oppressed, repressed, suppressed, and depressed, and Jesus somehow invents feminism, and I believe the pantsuit. The view that purity laws were horrible and oppressive and Jesus does away with purity laws, when the fact is what he's doing is restoring people to states of ritual purity.
Yeah.
The view that Torah was impossible to follow when Jesus basically says, you know, love God, love neighbor, don't worry, be happy. When in fact he makes Torah more rigorous. Like the Torah says don't murder, he says don't be angry. The Torah says don't commit adultery, he says don't think about it. That's doing what rabbinic Judaism, post-biblical Judaism calls building a fence about the law. You have a law, you make another law to make sure you don't violate the first one. So Jesus is by no means Torah light. He's really quite Torah rigorous.
Yeah.
The view that the temple was a horribly corrupt system that exploited peasants and enforced these impossible purity laws, and then Jesus comes and takes it down. Well, that doesn't work either, because he's very clear that the Torah is his father's house, that the temple, rather, is his father's house. And when we get to the book of Acts, we see his followers continuing to worship in the temple. In Romans 9, Paul talks about worship. The Greek term is latreia. New Testament is written in Greek. The Hebrew term would be avodah. It means temple worship. And that's one of the permanent gifts that God has given the Jewish people. The view that Jews hate all foreigners and Jesus invents the United Nations. When we have Gentiles worshiping in the Jerusalem temple, we have Gentiles worshiping in synagogues. They're called God-fearers. We have Gentiles converting to Judaism, including Nicolaus, the proselyte from Antioch. I think he's in Acts 4. And we have Jews and Gentiles engaged together in neighborhood relationships and in trade. So Jesus doesn't invent the United Nations. It's all this model, particularly in churches today, of trying to make Jesus relevant.
Yeah.
So if he's going to be relevant on women's rights or on healthcare or on welcoming immigrants or whatever it is, the easiest preaching move is to make Judaism the negative and then have Jesus invent social justice. And that's a miscarriage of history. It's erasing the entire, to use the Christian term, Old Testament tradition. Deuteronomy and Amos are certainly concerned about the poor, for example.
Yes.
And it's making Jesus not a human being, not a product of his own culture. And that's bad Christian theology.
It is. And I love, I mean, it's also just a very a simplistic reading of the New Testament, sort of like on this very surface level of just taking maybe conversations or interactions he has with, for example, the Pharisees, right? And then sort of making all of these assumptions about the whole religious structure or how it went. And it's easier to do that. It's I don't want to say lazy because I don't want to beat up on my fellow preachers. But it
certainly can be.
It can be. Yeah, it can be. It can be. And so, kind of in that, some of these assumptions of like, we wish that, these mischaracterizations of Jesus almost are trying to keep him relevant. I hear maybe the most anti-Jewish around Holy Week. And around how we talk about the Pharisees. Do you have any good examples, or how do you wish Christian preachers talked about the events of Holy Week differently? I know that wasn't something. I was inspired.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, you have options. First of all, the Pharisees don't show up in the Passion narratives. They just kind of disappear. So the major Jewish quote unquote perpetrators would be the high priest, the elders, and so on. It is helpful to know that Caiaphas, the high priest, is appointed by Pontius Pilate, and he can't do the work without the permission of the Roman governor. And when Pilate gets booted out of office, so does Caiaphas. The Roman governors keep hold of the priestly vestments, and he can't do the job without the clothing. So if we look at Caiaphas not as, quote, the leader of the Jews, but as a local Roman political appointee, then we have a much better sense about what's going on here.
Yeah.
If we think about how the early followers of Jesus came to understand, in some cases, fellow Jews, because the original followers are all Jews themselves. It's not like on Easter Sunday, they suddenly cease being Jews and become Christians.
Yeah.
They had to figure out some way of explaining why the Jews, for the most part, didn't sign on to the Jesus program. Well, the reason most of them did not is because the Messianic age did not arrive. And for Judaism broadly construed, the Messianic age was a time when everybody comes back from the dead. There's not a one-off. That's why Paul refers to Jesus in 1 Corinthians as first fruits of the resurrection. He's expecting final harvest same season. So his timing was off. They expect a final judgment. They expect peace on earth. And they got none of that. So local Jews are looking around saying, well, if he's the Messiah, where's the Messianic age? And they didn't have a sense of a second coming. That's all brand new. So since the early followers of Jesus believed that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was resurrected, and that was abundantly obvious and true to them, they had to figure out why the Jews didn't sign on. So Paul practically says, I'm in Romans here. Well, a hardening has come upon Israel. When Paul says Israel, he means Jews, so that, cause and effect, the mission can go to the Gentiles. But as Paul puts it, in the end, all Israel will be saved, by which he means all Jews. So Paul has a temporary delay in order for the Gentile mission to begin. Well, that's fine. But the Gentile mission began, and still the Jews aren't signing on. Matthew suggests they're misled by their leaders, but that only lasts for a generation. And by the time we get up to Paul, who's probably the last gospel to be written, Paul suggests that the Jews, the Greek term is judaioi, and Paul uses the term, and John uses the term about 70 times, that they're children of the devil. They do their father's desires. They were never fated to get it in the first place. So how does one explain people who disagree? Oh, they must be predestined to be children of the devil. So preachers have a choice. You can read with Paul. You could read with contemporary sense of how we know anti-Semitism goes wonky very quickly and the violence that can come from that. Or you can read with John and say some people are children of the devil. I would suggest not reading with John in this case. That's the reason we have a canon, is because we have different voices speaking, and it's up to the theologians and the ethicists and the people of conscience to determine what should be proclaimed.
Oh, that's so good.
If you're on the lectionary, which many Methodists are, you can choose perhaps on Holy Friday not to read the Johannine portion of the lectionary, but to take a cue from the Black Church, which does this very well. The Black Church traditionally does the 7 last words of Jesus. That's a good preaching moment.
Yeah.
And for people who are only in church 2 or 3 times a year, at least this way you get all 4 Gospels in the collection. So you have a choice, and sometimes you have to preach against the grain of where the text is going. And that's actually the role of the Holy Spirit, theologically speaking.
Yeah. I love the idea of, for us, and we used the word kind of lazy earlier. I think some of it is the way we go the easy route for us. And the easy route is kind of, I don't know if it's deeply that kind of sinful humanity within us, the us and them, the othering, and ways that we're able to engage the text. One of the things, I'm back in school again for the first time in 10 years, right? And I'm in a doctorate class at a seminary, and there's only two straight white men in this cohort with me. I mean, and it's everybody else is from very, very different perspectives than me, from different areas of the country. I'm the only Louisville person in here, so the only local. And being able to hear their voice in the midst of my own biblical interpretation, in my own now preaching and teaching throughout it, I can't help but think, oh, what would she think? Right? What would they think through this? What do they bring the text that I'm just not seeing? And I think that's made me way more faithful to biblical interpretation. And part of it being back into an academic setting has like just drawn me back out to engage my mind once again. Now I'm also with folks who are fantastic and brilliant like you, AJ, and when your colleagues, Sue Garrett there at the seminary, who y'all know each other and helped us introduce. And I'm, again, extremely grateful for these connections, because we have no business talking to really cool folks like you. Just no business.
To the list. No business.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Please just stop that. Don't go there. Everybody has business talking with everybody else. We're all children of God. Don't go there.
Yeah.
That's
because I will get annoyed. Don't annoy me.
But it so helps. And whether you are listening to a podcast like this one, or whether you are diving into a book, or whether you're having a conversation, it informs us. And sometimes in this very isolated culture we're in right now, this very divided and anti and unable to have conversations, I think we bring that to our text too when we are in our most unhealthy self. So when we're choosing which text to preach on, their interpretation that we're going to bring, what text we're going to bring to our people that we have the privilege of leading, we can't do it alone. We can't do it isolated. And we're giving all these tools and resources and folks to be able to engage with the text once again. So all that to say, I super appreciative, AJ, of helping us to wrap our minds around faithfulness and what it means to have the responsibility to interpret and to consider, because we can do so much damage if we do not.
Oh, yeah. Clergy are in a very privileged, but also in a very precarious position. I think this is why the Epistle of James advises people not to become teachers, right? Because you can screw people up very, very easily. You are in the position to correct unfortunate stereotypes, and you can do it both by commission and you can do it by omission. So if you have a text that might lead a congregant into some sort of sexist or anti-Semitic or whatever anti-minoritized view, you have the opportunity of saying, hey, I have heard this text preached but I find a better way of approaching it to be.
That's good.
So you can preempt the difficulty, or you can just engage it directly. I liked very much your point about being in an environment where there are people who are different from you. So I find it helpful in a preaching moment to imagine that the people in the congregation are not all just members of the church who had been there for 80 years. There may be visitors. There may be seekers. There may be friends of the family. They may be, seminarians who are, checking out churches. I mean, you never know. I find it helpful to tell students, imagine me sitting in the back pew and don't say anything that's going to hurt me, or imagine my kids sitting in the front pew and don't say anything that's going to hurt these kids. And it makes preaching more responsible.
Yeah.
I love that there's a diversity of voices that we can listen to in interpreting the text, but also a diversity of listeners, right? Of hearers, and being mindful of our own context in that sense. And all of this, what we're articulating is that the work of a preacher and that exegetical work, it's hard work. We've seen in throughout history, in our own social political moment right now, you can make the scripture say whatever you want. And I think that's the precarious situation that you might be alluding to, right? I mean, we can lead and teach and lead people astray in that way and lead to a lot of harm, some that we might not even see. And so we have to kind of take that holy responsibility. I always say that, I've been in full-time ministry for 10 years now, but preaching every week for, I guess, 6. And I get nervous a little bit every time I go up into that pulpit. And it's not because I'm not, it's not like an issue of faith. It's not, I don't think it's a spiritual issue. I think it's because I feel the weight of that responsibility and the spiritual authority that has been entrusted to me by these people who have come to listen. And I want to handle it with care. I think, let the Holy Spirit do her work. But
I mean, I've been doing this longer than you. And whenever I get up to give a talk, to this day, I get nervous because of that sense of responsibility, wanting to be clear, wanting not to implant something I did not intend that could fester into something really quite nasty. Yeah. So I will, and to your listeners and viewers as well, if you have questions, you are welcome to email me. I always think it's a good idea to do follow-up. So, and this is the benefit of preaching buddies, or having a workshop where you can get together with other people who do your job and say, "Here's what I was thinking of saying. What do you think?" Because very often we can't even hear the problems in our own rhetoric, and we say something that does not intend to be offensive, but somebody on the other side takes it to be offensive, and then we kind of get called up short.
Yes.
So then how do we avoid that? And that means having multiple audiences and multiple critics. And that requires being vulnerable.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And I love, like what you noted that, Rob, you shared the diversity in your cohort now and you're studying in this academic setting. But often, in ministry, it's a very isolating work that we do. And even though we're all preaching week after week, we don't all follow the lectionary. Some of us might be series based. We may or may not be preaching the same thing every week, but that doesn't mean we can't be intentional about forming our own little preaching group where we're doing some of the exegetical work together or sharing ideas or trying things out. And I think in one of the healthiest seasons that I had, I got to be a part of, when it comes to preaching, I got to be a part of sort of a teaching team at one of our larger churches here in Louisville. And we had pastors from 4 different churches represented, and we had all committed to preaching the same Lenten series. And that was incredibly just enriching in my preaching life during a really busy time in our church calendar, right? Of I wasn't trying to do all of that work on my own. We were sharing and resourcing each other, but also troubleshooting, right? Like watching out for when we come to this passage. Right. You might have heard that it said this, but yeah.
Yeah. So at 5:00 in the evening, you have your drink of choice. You get on Zoom, and you agree you're done at 5:45 or however long your Zoom thing lasts. Yeah. And you say, I want to talk about this sermon. Here's what I'm planning on saying. Yeah. Jesus talks about 2 or 3 being gathered in his name. I think that was specifically addressed to clergy. Work this out in a community. You're not in this on your own. Yeah. Yeah. And Paul talks about being all things to all people, but he's not talking about doing it all at the same time. Yeah. So figure out what your congregation needs to hear on that particular morning, which may not be what somebody else's congregation needs to hear on that particular morning.
That's good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's the work of prayer and letting the Holy Spirit guide and inspire us. Because Lord knows if Duke taught me this, you do the exegetical work or you have your small group and you might come up with 5 or 6 different sermon topics. You can't. I remember one person saying, Rachel, you can't say it all to them in one Sunday, and that's the work of the Spirit, discerning of what is needed in this moment.
Right. And you keep notes. So when you come back 3 years later, you got a different sermon.
Right.
And
that's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You do a favor to your future self. You've sort of already noted, and we've talked kind of around it, of how just an anti-Jewish reading of the New Testament causes harm. It leads to bigotry, but all inspired by just bad theology. You also have mentioned supersessionism, which, this idea that Christians in the universal church have somehow replaced the Jewish people of God as God's covenanted people. And that has led historically to just horrific, harmful, terrible things. And all of this is why we're saying we need to have a better reading of the New Testament. We need to do the work and don't do it alone. But do you have any other sort of advice or encouragement you might offer for Christian leaders to better preach and teach, especially the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, without unintentionally reinforcing kind of that supersessionist reading or theology?
Yeah, and well, you've just asked about half a dozen very good questions. So that's right. Half a dozen really good ideas. I think the church basically is supersessionist. I think religions that come out of other religions are supersessionist. So Methodists are in sort of supersessionists over Anglicanism. Right? It's Anglicanism 0.2. And then you have different Methodists which are going in different directions, and they all think like they're the most recent and best version. Most churches do that. Okay. I mean, the Anglicans are Roman Catholicism 0.2, and so on. Rabbinic Judaism is Pharisaism 0.2, right? So it's what the tradition was, but then it's its next iteration. So I don't think the church should try not to be somehow a fulfillment of Jewish hopes, because that's what the messianic claim regarding Jesus is. That's supersessionism, but supersessionism can be nice. You can say we are, the 2-point version of whatever you are, Second Temple Judaism, but Jews are still under covenant with God because God doesn't go back on God's promises. The Torah is still valid in terms of Jewish practice and belief, because that's Paul. When Paul says negative things about the Torah, he's talking to Gentiles because he doesn't want Gentiles converting to Judaism. He wants them to be, in effect, ex-pagan pagans. That's an expression from my friend Paula Fredrickson. But Torah law is perfectly valid for Jews, like keeping the Sabbath and so on. And we're all in this together. And at the end of time, Jews and Gentiles come to worship together, because that's the Christian view. That's Romans. It's also the book of Revelation. So you don't water down the particulars of your own tradition on the altar of interfaith sensitivity. For the church, Jesus is Lord and Savior for Jews, unless they're Messianic Jews. He's not. We don't have to agree on that. Judaism and Christianity are both, in effect, unfinished products. The church is waiting for Jesus to come back, and the synagogue is waiting for the Messiah to come in the first place. And nobody knows when. Okay? So we work together, and we wait for that revelatory thing. And we figure out there are certain places we're going to disagree. But on the important things, like justice and mercy and walking humbly with your God, we can agree on that.
Yeah. That's
fine. In terms of preaching on the Old Testament, I just prefer you call it Old Testament. Because if you call it Old Testament, now I know you're talking about the Bible, Christian Bible Part 1.
Yes.
Because you're not going to talk about, the Greek Testament. That doesn't follow. As long as you remember that old is good, foundational. Like, I'm old. Old doesn't mean stick it up on the shelf and dust it off once or twice a year. It means absolutely essential to knowing who we are. Bedrock, foundation. Jesus is the middle of the story, which starts with creation, and for the church ends with Revelation. So just call it Old Testament. Make sure old is good, and I guarantee you that senior citizens in your churches will be very happy to hear that. If you're preaching on the lectionary gives you opportunities. Sometimes the lectionary is just really it's wonky.
Yeah.
I was just about to use a more negative term. And the pairings are not good because they're designed to be antithetical, like bad Old Testament, good New Testament. Sometimes they're really quite helpful. But you can pick up passages. The Old Testament is fabulous on questions of poverty.
Yeah.
And Deuteronomy, for example, is very proactive. Amos is most of the prophets are proactive. The Old Testament is fabulous on critiquing the powers that be, whatever the government happens to be, particularly if the government is being abusive. It's very good about justice in terms of how neighbors are supposed to get along with each other. It raises questions about ethics without necessarily providing a solution, because in some cases there is no easy answer, and the text is not going to give you an easy answer where there is none. Like, it's all God's will. I mean, that doesn't help. Somebody in your family dies an untimely death or is attacked or something dreadful happens. The Old Testament gives us these stories to help us deal with it. It lets us know that bad things happen and people do bad things, not just over there, but in our own household. And that's stuff we need to acknowledge. It speaks with multiple voices. Talk about immigration. Look at something like the Book of Ruth. which talks about Jewish immigrants in the land of Moab and Moabite immigrants in the land of Israel, and the care that is taken in each case. You got options.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. Thank you. And you kind of touched on, can you repeat the phrase that you said? Don't water down your own.
Don't water down your own tradition to a lowest common denominator. It's like Jews and Christians are all climbing up the same mountain. I'm not sure we're doing that. We have different Bibles and different reception histories of the text that we share. So we may well be climbing up different mountains or, going down different rabbit holes. Who knows?
Yeah.
Don't sacrifice the particulars of who you are on the altar of interfaith sensitivity.
That's
interfaith sensitivity. Yeah.
Right. So there are certain things that Christians will proclaim, like Jesus is Lord and Savior. Or if you happen to be Trinitarian, we're now having the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, that Jesus is fully God and the Holy Spirit's part of this Trinitarian model. Well, Jews don't agree. So what? We can disagree without hating each other. And we can disagree because religious faith, as I understand it, I don't think faith is based on logic, like Sudoku, those number games. I'm really good at Sudoku. I have a very logical mind. You give me a Sudoku thing, a pencil, and an eraser, and I can crack the puzzle. I'm very, very good at them. But I don't think faith is like Sudoku. Faith is not based in logic, which is head things. Faith is based in the heart. It's based in love. You love because you love, not because you do not because you did a cost-benefit analysis. Like, person has good dental hygiene and an advanced degree, I think I'll marry this person. You fall in love because you fall in love. The church loves the Christ. The Christian loves the Christ because he somehow speaks to their heart, or because he somehow revealed himself to them. I mean, Paul had all the logic in the world. He gets the Jesus thing not by logic, but by revelation. Right? Jesus' disciples on the road to Emmaus knew their texts. The only way they can see Jesus in their texts is by revelation. And then after that revelation, after that love, then you can fill in all those other blanks. People whose love is placed differently, for example, in the Torah or in the God of Israel, will fill in the blanks differently because people love differently.
Absolutely. And what a profound point that our world right now needs to hear, that you don't have to water down your tradition or your particularities about what you believe for the sake of sort of interfaith sensitivity or dialogue, but also just to still be a decent, respectful human being, right? I mean, I think we're living in these really divisive times where it's this myth of like, you have to agree with everything completely or else I'm your enemy, right? And you're hated. And then again, Jesus calls us to love our enemies. So,
if you have that, then you don't have dialogue, you just have monologue. Dialogue
absolutely.
So there has to be some difference. And then we better understand each other, not only if we understand what keeps us similar, love of God, love of neighbor, being children of God, being in the image and likeness of God, and so on, but also what makes us distinct, and then to celebrate those distinctions. And if the Christian wants to claim that, the only way to heaven is through Jesus, which is a good reading of the Gospel of John, then let Jesus do his work and let him make the final judgment. That's not all of the individual Christian.
It's not our job. That's right.
Not job. And you don't have the capacity to do that. That's taking on God's role. Let God be God.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I love focusing on what you hold in common, and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God and love God and love neighbor. I mean, there are so many things that we hold in common that help us be just decent humans today, loving people today, fulfilling what we think God is calling us to do today. And we can do that together in terms of some of this interfaith dialogue. Just my church recently here in Louisville became a church member or church partner of a justice organization called Clout. It's Citizens of Louisville Organized and United Together. And they've been working for almost 40 years advocating for our neighbors, and had some pretty amazing things that they've done. Like they got the metro government to just put millions of dollars in a fund for housing for senior adults so they could age in place. And it's been a real gift as a clergy person, kind of getting to know this organization. And one of the things that the clergy of Clout do is they get together for like a text analysis conversation like once every other month. Nice. And the first time I went, there was a retired Roman Catholic priest There was a rabbi. There was a Black Baptist female pastor, and then me. And I was the youngest, probably by 25 or 30 years. And it was amazing conversation. I was so humbled by just the wisdom in the room. And also, now that I've gotten to know the organization better, there's a real friendship and affection among the religious leaders and clergy of Clout. People I would have never had conversation with if it weren't for sort of them leading us in that way. And I just think what an example of everything that you're saying, of how to model these sort of interfaith dialogues that our world needs right now, to focus on what we have in common, for love of God and love of neighbor. Yeah.
Right. And stand on your own rock at the same time, rather than throw it to do damage. So you don't give up your own identity in that process of dialogue. At what point can I yield? At what point is, no, I'm not yielding on this, but since I can't, where else can we go? And then you're more honest to yourself, and you're a better friend and a better dialogue partner.
Yeah, that's good. I love that. I love that. Well, the last question that we'll ask, and you've mentioned it, and I'll just go ahead and recommend to all of our listeners, all of your work, AJ, and your books, and I've used them at my church. They're a tremendous asset, and just the curriculum and studies that you offer. But do you have any other resources that you might recommend in addition to your own? Because I'm recommending those. Do you have any, when you're talking about greater historical accuracy, or sort of really the Jewish context of the New Testament, do you have any other resources for us working preachers Sunday to Sunday that we could maybe reference?
Yeah. Single One-Stop Shopping is a book I co-edited with Mark Brettler called The Jewish Annotated New Testament. Oxford University Press, second edition, 2017. The third edition will be out in early 2026, so you might want to wait for that.
Yeah,
it has multiple essays in the back, short, user-friendly, on everything you'd want to know about historical context. Who are the Pharisees? What's the law? There's in the third edition, there's an article on the land, which is a fraught subject today, an article on supersessionism, an article on sin and atonement, and different ways that Jews and Christians have of understanding that, articles on Abraham and Moses, articles on the Pharisees and the Romans at the time, and so on. In the annotations, where we know that sermons typically go a little one-sided, we pull out little gray boxes saying, don't go here, go there. So we can look at this text as a kind of like prophylactic against bad Christian preaching. That's awesome. If you're interested in using Old Testament material, a book that I co-authored with Mark Brettler called The Bible With and Without Jesus looks at how, to use Christian terminology, Old Testament texts get deployed in the New, but what they would have meant in their original Old Testament context, right, for audiences who had never heard of Jesus. What they also meant to the Jewish community outside of Jesus' interpretation, like how they show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, and how they show up in Rabbinic Judaism. So you can get a sense of the multiple interpretations of these texts. For children, I have 7 children's books for kids between basically 3 and 7, or 2 if they're precocious and 7 if they like pictures. That most of them are on Jesus parables, and they have notes in the backs of each book to parent and caregivers saying, here's how you read this book to your child. Wow. Here are the open questions you can ask by which you can engage kids, rather than, what does this mean? Because kids don't, that's a right or wrong question. Yeah. But getting kids engaged. And since my co-author of these books, Sandy Sasso, and I believe that children are ethical beings, they know what's not fair. They know what it means to be overlooked. They know what it means to be lonely, to allow kids to give voice to their own emotions. And that provides the opportunity for the parent or caregiver to provide the care and the comfort that children need, using the Jesus stories as a base.
That's really cool.
Wonderful.
I was not aware of those, and so I'm excited to look those up. And I have a 3, almost 4-year-old now. At the showing of this, he'll be 4. He'll be 4. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles party will be done, and we'll move on. And that's going to be such a gift. And I'm always looking for gifts to give young families too. Like I think things that we can help as pastors is faith formation within the household, right? It's kind of giving resources, and this sounds perfect to go along with that. I would
agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll make sure we link those too.
Right. In case you're worried, they're published by Westminster John Knox, which is in fact located in Louisville. Just a publication wing of the Presbyterian Church USA. So they are kosher for Christians.
That's right. I love that. Well, thank you so much, AJ, for spending so much time with us and just the wisdom, the knowledge that we get, and gosh, your sense of humor is brilliant, and love being in the room with you digitally here, and will be such an asset to our listeners. We do have one last portion of which we did not send to you yet, and this is what's called the Holy Roast. So these are going to be kind of one-off questions, and the first thing that comes to your mind, whatever response is very good for us. And so there's a set of about 5 that I'll be asking you. And so whatever comes off, just kind of a round robin. Are you ready for it?
Okay.
If you could master instantly any skill, what would it be?
I want to be able to play the violin.
Oh, that's a good one. How do you take your coffee or your tea?
I drink mostly coffee, hot and black.
Hot and black. Like that. So do I. That's also mine. Who's a theologian that could be living or dead you'd love to have lunch with?
Can I add people who I already know?
You can.
The 2 people I'd really like to have lunch with are St. Augustine and Barbara Brown Taylor. I know Barbara, and she's just great fun for lunch.
Yeah.
Did we steal this?
I love that.
This part from Barbara Brown Taylor?
I think I heard some similar version of this from Brene Brown.
Oh, Brene Brown. That was it. Yeah. Okay. I was like, I think we've already stolen from her several times.
Yeah.
Would they be at the same lunch or different lunches?
Oh, I'd want them at the same lunch.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that.
That makes sense.
What's something you tell your younger self, but they probably wouldn't listen?
You should have gone to law school. Awesome. It's the frustration of, and I feel this increasingly, that I've spent my life dedicated to helping people who have been harmed by the Bible, whether it's Jews who have been harmed by anti-Semitic comments that Christians make, or queer people harmed by particular Bible readings. And when I see in the culture things just getting worse, there's a part of me that thinks I have wasted my life, and I should have gone to law school like my mother wanted. And the result is I'm glad that I did not.
Yeah.
But that thought increasingly occurs to me. Yeah. Because I could have worked in legislation and that might have been able to change things, but I don't know.
Yeah. You don't need this at all, AJ, but and you're not asking for this, and I realize that, but your work has been such a gift and has done so much good inside of our local churches, and particularly I think in the American South too, which is my context, right? From Florida, lived in North Carolina, now in Kentucky. Yeah. That it has done such a gift to us in interpretation.
And your scholarship and work.
Right? If it helps one person, then it's worthwhile. I get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And your scholarship and words and work will far outlive any of us here. And that's something
thank you
too.
For that. And I'm not dead yet, so we're good.
No, I love our legacies. That's right.
That's right. All right. Last question for you. Are you ready? Okay. Yeah. Last one. What is bringing you joy right now?
Meatloaf spout out of hell.
No, nice.
R.I.P. Right? R.I.P. Meatloaf. That's awesome.
Yes. Christian Church Disciples of Christ, I believe. Meatloaf makes me happy. I just put on a Meatloaf album. I get on the treadmill and I'm like, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah. So do I.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again for spending so much time with us. And I know people are being extremely grateful to sit in on this conversation with us. And we will link all of these sources that we've talked about and some other things that we find helpful along the way too, that are engaging with this conversation. And we look forward to having another conversation with you in the future, AJ. So thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
It's great to be with you.